Hey guys, and welcome back. Since I first started this Inquisition army last year, I knew I wanted some kind of walker to go with it. I also knew I wanted to use the Penitent Engines as the basis for that conversion, because they've already got all of that nice gothic-y detail, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted them to look like. Eventually I did get an idea, and that's illustrated here in this splendid concept art. I'm pretty sure these guys are inspired by the valiant gargoyles in Elden Ring, and they clearly gave some kind of inspiration to the name as well. Which they do live up to a certain extent, because when the ships of the army do travel around in space, these guys sit on the outside of it like actual gargoyles. To start off with, I assembled the torso, and immediately came to the first modification I'd need to do. I didn't want these syringes in the back, so they were clipped away and the void that was left behind filled with plasticard. These syringes I would then go on to use in a different video. Next I needed a head. Unfortunately there was nothing in my bits box that fitted what I was looking for, so I was going to need to sculpt it. I blocked out the rough shape I wanted with milliput, which I allowed to cure, and then I returned to and carved back in the shape that I wanted. I'm going for a stylized eagle head, since that's the way the Imperial Aquila is usually shown, and it's also going to be a lot easier to sculpt. I added a flamethrower to the open mouth of one of these guys, because it seemed cool for them to be able to breathe fire, and also it means that I can actually use the Penitent Engines datasheet with these guys in game. Once the heads were done, I glued a length of wire into a small hole in the back, and bend it into the shape of a neck, so that I could size up the next portion of the conversion. This next portion being the wings. I cut out a template so I could get the right proportions for that classic Aquila look, which I would then translate onto some thick plasticard sheet, after removing the protective coating of course. After which I used my clippers and knife to follow around that template I'd marked on. Once the shape was cut out, I was going to need to add some detail, which intimidated me so much it took me almost 8 months to actually start it. And now, as I finally begin to carve some detail in with my knife and a sculpting tool, let me give you a little bit of lore for these guys. The stylized sections of the head and wings didn't actually begin life as part of these machines, but as decoration for the Imperial Palace on Terra. During the final stages of the Horus Heresy, when Terra was sieged, these parts of the palace collapsed or came loose, no one's really sure, and never actually got put back in place. Instead they were forgotten in a vault somewhere until very recently, when a certain Lord Inquisitor you'll be hearing more about in future videos happened to stumble across them, and they were repurposed into parts of the Imperial Gargoyles. Now you may be thinking I've been carving away at this wing for a while now, and so was I. This was all just one wing. It took easily a full working day to do this. And so to save some time, I decided to make a mold of the wing so I could just fill it with a combination of green stuff and milliput and cast new wings while I worked on other bits of the project. But these guys really should be actually able to fly, and though I could just say the wings are some lost anti-gravity tech, I think a jetpack will do just as well. I was a bit short of jetpack pieces, so I used this flamethrower instead, repositioning the cables to connect with the back of the gargoyles. Next I wanted to flesh out the neck. I rolled out long noodles of green stuff, adding some ribbing to a few of them, and then left them to dry for about an hour. Now they were hard enough to work with but not so hard that they couldn't be bent into shape, I gradually added these tubes and pipes onto the neck and into the void inside the torso. Though you can't see them inside the mess of cables, that is where the pilots are. They're often incredibly thin, so that they can fit into the tiny space available between the wires. Once the tubes were in, this was really beginning to take shape. Next were the arms. I wanted a glaive shield combo for these guys. The shield was sourced from the Imperial Knight kit, which was attached by cutting off the end of the arm and fixing it in place with a styrene rod, so it could be at a slight angle. The other one was slightly more complex. I carved out a glaive blade from some more thick plasticard, giving it some serrations, which is inspired by this John Blanche artwork, after which it was then attached with pins to some other lengths of styrene tube. It was lacking some detail though, so I added these little pieces from the Imperial Knight kit. To attach the glaive to the arm though, I needed to cut away the buzzsaw, leaving just the inner circle still there, so that it looked as if the glaive could pivot up and down. The glaive was then tied into the model a bit more by adding this wire to make it look more like a sort of power glaive, and also to give some visual continuity between the glaive itself and the arm it's attached to. Now all that was really left to do were the legs. I thought the only modification I was going to need to do would be on the feet, where I bent the toes to make them look more sort of bird-like. But unfortunately, the legs on this kit are just kinda short, so they had to be lengthened. I used a combination of cutting and repositioning joints for a more extended posture, and in some places some actual leg lengthening with milliput and green stuff. Then at last I could assemble them. Or, well, actually, I had 2 of these guys, so I needed to do all that again. But now I do have all the bits, assembly could finally begin. This was really satisfying to see a project I'd been working on and off for about a year finally come together into something tangible and not just a collection of pieces. I do think maybe I should have given a two-handed glaive for some nice variety to one of them, but there's always next time. Maybe I could make another cool withered one in future to represent that other kind of decrepit head of the Aquila, but maybe not right away. They are done, and they are absolutely awesome. I really love these guys. They've come out more or less exactly how I wanted. He's fallen off again. So now it was time to prime the models. I left the arms separate. I've created a beast. And also added these purity seals to a little stick that I can use to stick on after I've painted to cover up any sort of dodgy spots in my paint job. This isn't really related to the main part of the video, but I've just found out if you scrape the numbers off the sprue bits, you kind of just have some numbers to stick to stuff. I mean, these are kind of messed up because my knife's a bit blunt now, but I don't know, I thought it was worth sharing. I started off with a dry brush of Iron Warriors all over the metal parts of the model, followed up by a lead belcher dry brush just from above. To darken this down, I used some Nuln Oil so they'd fit in better with the rest of the army. Then I tackled the gold and bronze. I used a base coat of 50/50 Rhinox hide and Balthazar gold across all of the areas, but I wanted some differentiation between the ancient wings and head and then the much more recent trim on the rest of the model. For the wings, I used dry brushes to achieve this effect. I used Balthazar gold as well as a 50/50 mix of that and Retributor armor, followed by pure Retributor armor, but it was a bit too shiny. So to dull the sort of metallic sheen a bit and make it appear a bit older, I used a thin wash of Agrax Earthshade, and then brought back some of the shine with a highlight of the same 50/50 mix I'd dry brushed with. The trim was done with the same colours, but it was layered instead of dry brushed, and never got pure Retributor armor. All of the bronze areas never got more than just Balthazar gold. And of course Agrax Earthshade. The wings and head needed to look old for the Imperial Gargoyles to command a relic-like status on the battlefield. So when they were initially assembled, some of the verdigris was allowed to remain, to accentuate the battle damage that they'd suffered on Terra 10,000 years ago. This was actually just me using Nihilakh Oxide in the casting floors to make it, look a bit cooler, but there's the lore reason for these venerated machines looking a bit grimy. Next I dealt with the armour. I'd always done it so that it was sort of this order of black, Eshin Grey, Mechanica Standard Grey, and then Dawnstone, but I've actually just realised that Mechanica Standard Grey is actually darker than Eshin Grey. I have no idea why I've been doing these the other way around, but I'm sort of not sure if it would look weird to change it now. So even though this makes no sense, I'm going to stick with what I was doing. I laid up from a 50/50 mix of Eshin Grey and black, through Eshin Grey, up to Mechanica Standard Grey, then a wash of Nuln Oil to darken it all down, and some Dawnstone highlights. It's actually been so long since I did this, I may have had to rewatch my own video to remember the method. Next I painted in the red stripe on the shield with Corn Red, which I darkened down with Carabel Crimson and various black glazes. This actually took quite a long time of back and forthing. I'm not sure why I found it so difficult this time, but most of it's about to get covered up anyway. Since I wanted something on the shield, this sort of winged skull symbol that I had on the standard of that first squad I made. I think it's probably going to be the logo for the army as a whole. I'm sure it's in use somewhere else in the 40k universe, but I'm not really sure where, so it's not that big a problem for me. Then we were actually almost done. All we had now were these small details, which hopefully wouldn't take too long to deal with. Like these tanks on the arm, which I painted in with a 50/50 mix of Corn Red and Cantor Blue, after which I highlighted it with pure Corn Red. Next I dealt with the fire. I've never painted normal fire before, so I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I started off with pure white, and then Flashgit's yellow, followed by highlights of decreasing size with Fire Dragon Bright and Evil Sun Scarlet. After which the transitions were smoothed out a bit with some more thin Fire Dragon Bright. I think these came out okay, but there's definitely room for improvement in future fire painting. Then I painted in the Purity Seals, the parchment with Gothel Brown, Baneblade Brown and Screaming Skull, the text with Black Legion contrast paint since it flows off the brush a little bit nicer than Abaddon Black, and painted in the wax with Khorne and Mephiston Red, for all of these bits leaving black in the deep shadows. Finally, I added some glow to the eyes and the power glaive with Evil Sun Scarlet and Teclis Blue, both with some added white. And then all that was left to do was add some gore and paint the bases, which left me, at long last, with these. Thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of the video. As I post this, it's very nearly this channel's 2nd birthday, and thank you for getting it to 833 subscribers, which is just mental. But now for one last tiny piece of lore for these guys. It is just a rumour amongst the pilots and those who fight alongside the Imperial Gargoyles, that in the heat of battle, just sometimes, something in the machine pushes the pilot into action. An action they themselves would otherwise not normally take. The rumour is that this will that overcomes the pilot is the will of the Emperor himself. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.